I always considered myself a pragmatist. As a sound engineer for true crime documentaries, my world was one of waveforms and decibels, of isolating footsteps on a gravel path, or the faint click of a safety catch in a 911 call. Ghosts were frequency interference. Evil was a psychological diagnosis. Then I took the Eldritch job. The brief was simple: audio restoration for a documentary about a vanishing king. In 1997, the entire Eldridge family parents' 12-year-old daughter disappeared from their rural Victorian home. The only clue: a 30-minute cassette tape found on the hall table, labeled Sarah's Lesson. Sarah was the daughter. The tape was a mangled mess of magnetism, chewed by a faulty player, then baked in the attic's summer heat for decades. My task was to salvage anything audible, a professional challenge. I worked nights in my home studio, a soundproofed basement bunker. The initial passes revealed nothing but a corrosive hiss, a soup of decay. I began the painstaking process: spectral denoising, rebuilding the frequency profile layer by layer. It was on the third night that I first heard the voice beneath the hiss. Not a voice, a breath, a rhythmic, wet inhalation, like someone struggling with congested lungs, right at the edge of the tape's range. I isolated it, amplified. My skin prickled. It was too slow for a resting breath. One inhale every 15 seconds. A biological metronome. I labeled the track Breath, Unknown, and pressed on. Days later, I found the piano. Faint, ghostly plinks of a child practicing scales, painfully slow. Middle, C, D, E, then a fumble. A patient, deep voice, male, would say, "Again, Sarah." This repeated: scale, fumble, again, Sarah. It was mundane, cloying. I could picture the stern father, the frustrated child, but something in the timing felt off. I synced the breath track to the piano track. The wet, dragging inhale happened precisely in the silence between each commanded, "Again, Sarah," as if the breather was standing beside her, drinking in the moment of her failure. I started dreaming of that breath. I'd hear it in the hum of my refrigerator, the rush of my shower. My pragmatism began to fray. The documentary's producer, a relentlessly cheerful woman named Chloe, was thrilled with my findings. "Spooky, amazing texture," she chirped. She didn't have to listen to it alone in the dead of night. The breakthrough and the end of my sanity came when I managed to restore a clearer section of the father's voice. He said, "The posture, Sarah, straight back. It helps the resonance." But when I soloed the track, removing the piano's bleed, I heard it. Under his sentence, not a breath this time, but a voice, whispered in perfect unison with his second, granier, older voice, speaking the same words, a fraction of a second later, like a sickening echo. It wasn't on the tape before. It was being induced by the restoration process, a sonic phantom emerging from the magnetic decay. My hands were shaking. I ran a new process, one designed to reveal overlapping sounds. The waveform on my screen bloomed with horror. The father was not the only one speaking. That secondary, parasitic voice was layered under every single word he said. A doppelganger duet. And the breather track wasn't separate. It was this entity's constant, background, respiration, recorded. Because it was always there, standing between the father and daughter, inhaling the lesson. The final piece was Sarah's voice. I found only one instance, after a particularly harsh again, Sarah, from the fused voices, a tiny, tearful whisper. I can't. He's standing right behind you, Daddy. Asterisk. I played it once. The sentence hung in the treated air of my studio. The breath track, now a constant presence in my headphones, seemed to hitch, then deepen, as if in satisfaction. That's when the sounds began to migrate. First, it was my own recording equipment. A test tone I'd run would sometimes have a faint, guttural undertone. A few hours later, a microphone left on would pick up the slow, wet inhalation in an empty room. Then, it was my home audio. I'd pause a podcast and, in the second of silence, hear a single, faint piano key middle. See my coffee machine's gurgle developed a rhythmic, breathing quality. Asterisk. I was becoming a living tape recorder. The entity was transferring itself from the degraded cassette to the magnetic field of my hard drives, and now, somehow, to me, the studio, my sanctuary, became a torture chamber. Every shadow in the waveform monitor looked like a face. Every system hum carried a whisper. Asterisk. The climax was logical, inevitable. I was trying one last noise reduction algorithm, desperate to cleanse the tape, to undo my work. The screen flickered. All the separate tracks, the piano, the father, the double voice, the breath, Sarah's whisper, collapsed into one single, composite audio file. Before I could stop it, it began to play. Asterisk. The sounds were no longer separate. They were a symphony of dread. The plinking piano, the fused commanding voices, the weeping child, all orchestrated around that central, wet, dragging breath, and it was building. The scales played faster, wrong notes piling up. The command again. Sarah became a panicked, overlapping chant. Sarah's sobs turned to screams, and the breathing grew louder, closer, until it was no longer in the headphones, but in the room, behind my chair, each inhale a draining suction. Asterisk. I ripped the headphones off, but the sound didn't stop. It poured from my studio monitors at full, crushing volume. I scrambled for the power strip, yanked it. Silence, blinking, sweat-drenched silence. Asterisk. Then, from the absolute acoustic blackness of my soundproofed room, I heard it. Not through speakers, not on tape, in the room with me. A single, wet, ragged inhale from the corner where the cables lay coiled. Asterisk. It was real, it was free, and it had learned from the tape what it liked. It liked teaching, it liked failure. It liked being so close behind you that you could feel its cold, resonant breath on the nape of your neck. Asterisk. I fled the basement. I live in my well-lit kitchen now. I sent the files to Chloe, along with my resignation. She called, excited, saying the audio was the most terrifying thing she'd ever heard, a masterpiece. She asked how I'd engineered the final mix. I didn't tell her I hadn't. Asterisk. I hear it sometimes, not often. The house settles, and the rhythm is wrong, a 15-second interval between creaks. The wind sounds like it's trying to form words in unison with the news anchor on TV. And last night, pausing to listen to the quiet, I heard it, faint, middle, C, D, E, a fumble, then a whisper, not Sarah's, but one that has studied her father's voice for a long, long time. It said, again, asterisk. It is patient, it is hungry, and it is no longer on the tape. The lesson, it seems, is just beginning, and I am the only student left. The last of the daylight bled out over the Scottish moors as I turned the rental car onto the single-track lane. The GPS had lost signal 20 minutes prior, but the directions from the letting agency were clear enough. Follow the road until the stone bridge. Cross it, and the cottage will be alone at the end. The bridge was more of a crumbling culvert, the car's suspension groaning as it dipped through. Ahead, a squat gray stone cottage hunched against the rising hillside, its windows black and vacant. Fernlock, the name on the key fob. It was cheaper than anything else for miles, and the description promised solitude. I was a writer, or at least I was trying to be again, after the silence that had followed Anna leaving. The silence in my head was worse than the empty flat. This place, I thought, would either cure that or match it perfectly. The key turned with a gritty reluctance. The air inside was frigid and still, smelling of damp stone and ancient peat smoke. I dropped my bags and explored. 3 rooms downstairs, a kitchen with an antiquated AGA, a sitting room with a lumpy sofa, and a study. The study was why I'd chosen it. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, empty, save for a thick layer of dust, and a heavy oak desk facing the window, which looked back down the glen. Upstairs, a cramped bathroom and a bedroom under the eaves, the ceiling slanted. It would do. I built a fire, ate a tasteless sandwich, and at my desk, for the first time in months, I began to write. The words were rusty, but they came. The only sound was the crackle of the fire and the distant, mournful cry of a bird. The first night I woke at 3:17 a.m. The cold was absolute, a penetrating chill that my duvet couldn't combat. And there was a sound. Not the wind, it was dead calm. A soft, rhythmic scrape, scrape, scrape coming from downstairs. Like something heavy being dragged slowly across the flagstone floor. My heart hammered against my ribs. I lay there, paralyzed, until it stopped just before dawn. In the morning, rationalization set in. Old pipes, settling stones, the wind in a hidden crevice. I found nothing amiss. The second night, it happened again. 3:17 a.m., the cold first, a wave of it washing over the bed. Then the scraping, louder this time, more deliberate. It was followed by a new sound, a faint, wet clicking, like a tongue detaching from a palate. It seemed to come from the corner of the bedroom. I didn't move. I barely breathed. When gray light finally seeped through the window, my muscles were locked in terror. Daytime was a reprieve, but a fragile one. The glorious isolation I'd sought now felt like a siege. The silence of the glen was no longer peaceful. It was watchful. I tried to write, but my sentences were brittle, punctuated by my own constant listening. I ventured outside, but the landscape itself felt hostile. The gnarled, skeletal hawthorns, the peat bogs that swallowed light, the low-hanging mist that never seemed to lift. At the village store, a 10-mile drive, the elderly shopkeeper took my money without meeting my eye. As I turned to leave, he said quietly, "You're at Fernlock, then?" It wasn't a question. I nodded. He studied the countertop. It's quiet up there." There was a weight to his words. Some folks just want too much quiet. He wouldn't say more. That night, I resolved to stay awake. I armed myself with a heavy torch and a kitchen knife that felt absurd in my hand. I sat in the study, the desk lamp, a tiny pool of warmth. The clock ticked past midnight, past 1, past 2. My eyelids grew heavy. At 3:16 a.m., I jerked, fully awake. The temperature plummeted so rapidly I could see my breath plume in the lamplight. The lamp flickered and died. The fire in the hearth, which I'd kept banked, snuffed out as if smothered by an invisible hand. Asterisk then, the scraping began. Not from downstairs. From the hallway just outside the study door. Scrape, scrape. Each drag was accompanied by that wet, clicking sound. Closer now. A smell crept into the room, the iron-rich scent of peat bog mixed with something else, something rotten and sweet. Asterisk terror is not a scream. It is a vacuum. It sucked the air from my lungs and the strength from my limbs. The thing in the hallway was moving with a dreadful purpose. It wasn't passing by. It was coming for the door. Asterisk, the old oak door began to tremble in its frame. A soft, insistent pressure. Thump. A pause. Thump. I scrambled back, overturning my chair, pressing myself against the cold bookshelves. The door shook harder. The clicking was right on the other side now. A frantic, hungry sound. Asterisk with a splintering crack. The door's lock gave way. It swung inward, slowly. Asterisk, the thing in the doorway was a study in wrongness. It was the approximate shape and size of a man, but it seemed composed of the glen itself dark. Dripping peat clung to a skeletal frame, tangled roots and dead heather woven through its form. Where a face should have been was a smooth, dark hollow, like a water-worn stone, from which that terrible clicking emanated. It had no eyes, but I felt its attention fix on me, a physical weight. It dragged one leg, a mass of compacted soil and rock, accounting for the scraping noise. It was not a ghost. It was something older, something that belonged to this specific patch of hungry earth. Asterisk, it lurched into the room. I was frozen, a rabbit before a serpent. It stopped a few feet from me, its head tilting. The clicking slowed, became almost contemplative. Then, an image, not in my eyes, but directly in my mind. This desk, this room, but decades, maybe a century ago. Another man, hunched and writing furiously by lamplight. He was writing about the land, but not with love, with ownership, with a cold, analytical greed. He was mapping it, dissecting it in prose, stealing its secrets to sell them in the city. And the land, the living peat and stone and water of this place, had listened. It had grown tired of being observed, parsed, and taken from. Asterisk, the image shifted. The man at the desk grew older, more frantic, but the words stopped coming. He sat in this room, day after day, in a silence he could not bear. A silence he had made for himself, and the glen provided him with a permanent, absolute quiet. It showed me the man, not dead, but taken, absorbed into the wet, dark soil, becoming part of the thing that now stood before me. Asterisk, the understanding was worse than the fear. I hadn't come here to write about the moor. I had come to use it, just as that other man had, to mine my own pain here, to force productivity from its stillness. I had wanted its silence to fill mine, to take something from it without giving anything back. And the glen had sensed another hungry, empty thing, another soul that wanted too much quiet. Asterisk, the creature took another step, its mud-clad hand lifting. The clicking sound took on a new, eager rhythm. It wasn't anger I felt radiating from it. It was a dreadful, patient welcome, an invitation to join the permanent silence, to become part of the listening earth. Asterisk, my paralysis broke. With a raw shout, I threw the torch. It passed through the pecan-twigged chest, scattering clods of dirt, and clattered against the wall. The thing didn't flinch. It only extended its hand further. Asterisk, I ran. Not with strategy, but with the pure, screaming instinct of prey. I ducked under its arm, feeling a deathly cold emanate from it, and fled into the hall, up the stairs. I slammed the bedroom door and shoved the flimsy dresser against it. I heard it on the stairs. Scrape, thump, scrape, thump. It stopped outside the bedroom. The door began to bow inward. Asterisk, I flung open the window, ignoring the 20-foot drop to the rocky ground below. There was no choice. As the door behind me shattered, I climbed out, hung by my fingertips, and let go. Asterisk, the impact was a blinding shock of pain in my ankle. I screamed, rolled, and scrambled up, limping desperately for the rental car. I did not look back. I fumbled with the keys, weeping. My vision blurred. The engine roared to life. I reversed in a wild arc, stones pinging against the chassis, and sped down the track. In the rearview mirror, in the pitch black of the open cottage doorway, I saw a single, darker shape, not moving, just watching me leave. Asterisk, I drove until I hit the motorway, until the sun rose over a world that looked normal. I never reported it. Who would believe me? The broken door and the overturned furniture could be explained by a break-in. My sprained ankle was my own clumsiness. Asterisk, but I know what I invited. I know what waits in that kind of silence. My flat in the city is never quiet now. I keep the radio on, the TV murmuring, a fan running. The silence in my head is gone, replaced by a permanent, low-frequency hum of fear. I cannot write. Not a word. Every time I try, I see that peat-stained hand lifting in invitation, and I hear the wet, clicking sound from the corner of my room. It's faint, usually drowned out by the artificial noise I surround myself with. But sometimes, in the dead hours just before dawn, when the city is briefly still, it grows a little louder. It's learning, you see. It's learning that the quiet it offers doesn't have to be confined to a lonely glen in Scotland. It can grow anywhere. Even here, even in me. It's patient. It knows that eventually all man-made noise must fail. And then it will finish its welcome. The ticking of the grandmother clock in the hall was the only sound in the house. It was a steady, metronomic heartbeat I'd learned to ignore over the 2 months since I'd inherited the place from my reclusive Uncle Silas. The silence was what I'd craved after the city's constant drone. But here, in the sprawling Victorian, on the edge of the Cumbrian fells, it wasn't silence. It was a held breath. The first irregularities were textbook haunting. The smell of pipe tobacco, which Uncle Silas never smoked in the study. A profound, localized cold spot on the landing, regardless of the weather. The faint, muddy boot prints that sometimes appeared on the clean kitchen tiles, leading from the back door and fading away after 3 steps. I documented them all with a skeptic's detached curiosity, attributing them to drafts, memory, and the settling of an old house. Then the photographs changed. It was a small, leather-bound album I found in a desk drawer. Pictures of Uncle Silas, stern and alone, in various rooms of this very house. In one, he sat reading in the armchair by the fireplace. I'd glanced at it a dozen times, but on a rainy Tuesday evening, the book on his lap was no longer the one I remembered. The title on the spine once blurred, now clearly read Flora of the Northern Fells, a book I'd pulled from the shelf and was currently reading. I dismissed it as a trick of a mind starved for company. The next alteration was undeniable. A photograph of the empty dining room. In the background, the door to the butler's pantry stood ajar. In the darkness of the crack, a week later, was the faint but distinct curve of a human eye watching the empty room. The following night, the pantry door in the real house was open, precisely the same width. I closed it. In the morning, it was open again. A cold, professional dread settled in my gut. This wasn't a ghost repeating senseless actions. It was interactive. It was learning from me. I bought cameras, battery-powered, digital, with motion sensors. I set them up in the hall, the dining room, the landing. They captured nothing but me, pacing, staring, my face growing gaunt. But the phenomena escalated. The boot prints now reached the middle of the kitchen. The cold spot on the landing felt actively malevolent, a pool of icy water in the air. I began to hear the faintest sound of breathing, synchronized with my own, just a half-second out of phase, coming from the other side of my bedroom door. One morning, the camera in the hall was facing the wall. Its log showed no motion detected all night. The next, all cameras were found in a neat pile in the center of the dining table, their batteries dead. A silent demonstration of irrelevance. The true horror crystallized the day I found the note. It was in my own handwriting, on my own notepad, left on the pillow I'd just left unmade. It read, "The angles are wrong here. Don't count the windows." Trembling, I walked through the ground floor. I counted the windows facing the back garden. From the outside, there were 4. From the inside, standing in the corresponding rooms, I counted 5. The 5th was in the blind wall between the library and the conservatory. A window that looked out onto nothing but interior brick, its panes always dark, even at noon. I had never noticed it before. Now, I couldn't stop seeing it. It was a dead eye in the face of the house that night. The breathing on the other side of the door fell into perfect sync with mine. Then, it began to lead. I would exhale, and the sound from the hall would inhale. It was inside my respiratory rhythm. I stuffed a blanket under the door. The sound seeped through anyway, not through the crack, but through the solid wood. Sleep became impossible. I existed in a state of raw, frayed perception. The house was no longer a place. It was a system, and I was a component being recalibrated. The photographs continued to shift. Now, in the pictures, I began to appear. In the study, my back to the camera, looking at a shelf. In the hall, blurred, as if moving quickly, always unaware, always being documented. I decided to burn the album. As I held it over the kitchen sink, the flame of my lighter dancing, every light in the house extinguished at once. Not a flicker, but a simultaneous, absolute cut. In the profound blackness, the ticking of the grandmother clock stopped. The held breath was finally released, and then, from the darkness of the pantry, the 5th window, the dining room, the landing, came a new sound. The soft, shuffling scrape of boots on stone, not fading. Approaching it was, in the kitchen with me. I could feel the displacement of the air, a colder mass moving through the cold room. I could smell the damp earth, the old wool, the metallic hint of pipe smoke. My own breathing was a ragged saw. The other breath was calm, measured, inches from my face. The lights returned. The kitchen was empty. But on the gleaming surface of the refrigerator, written in the faint condensation of breath, was a single word. Soon I fled. I ran from the house, down the lane, to the village pub, babbling. They humored me, the city nephew gone soft in the head. The local Bobby gave me a tired smile and suggested, where could I rest? It wasn't in the house. It was on me. It was in the rhythm of my pulse, the structure of my lungs. I returned at dawn, not out of courage, but because the deed was in the house, and I needed to sell to be rid of it. The door was unlocked. Inside, everything was pristine. The cameras were gone. The album was back on the desk. The boot prints were absent. A desperate, fragile hope sparked. Had I broken the cycle by leaving? Had my acknowledgement satisfied it? I went to the sink for water. There, propped against the tap, was a fresh Polaroid photograph. It must have developed in the dark. It was a picture of this kitchen, taken from the hallway. In it, I was standing at this sink, my back to the camera, my head bowed. The timestamp in the bottom corner was today's date, and the time was 8:17 p.m. tonight. As I stare at the image, the proof of a future moment, I feel the atmosphere thicken. The light from the real window is fading, the sun dipping below the fells. It is 8:16 p.m. The grandfather clock in the hall remains silent. But from the dining room, I hear the distinct, gentle scrape of a chair being pulled out from the table. An invitation. The photograph was not a warning. It was an itinerary. My presence here at this exact time is not a mistake I made. It is the appointment I have been keeping since the moment I entered this house. Uncle Silas isn't the ghost. He was the previous occupant. The entity doesn't haunt the house. It curates it. It collects residents. And it documents every step of the process, until the distinction between the observer and the observed dissolves completely. My hand is shaking as I write this now. At the kitchen table, I can see the hallway in my periphery. The light is failing. It is hard to breathe because there is another set of lungs in this room, drawing the air in first, leaving me the dregs. The last thing I will write is this: the fifth window, the one in the blind wall, is no longer dark. From it shines a faint phosphorescent gray light, the color of a dead television screen. And in that light, I can see the outline of a man standing very still, holding something boxy and rectangular by his side. He is not looking out, he is looking in at me. It is 8:17 p.m.